The midterms are right around the corner, and things are looking pretty bleak for the Republicans. Their current odds of holding the House are sitting at around 25%, and that number really hasn't moved much in the last year and a half. Democrats are favored to win both the House and the Senate, though the Senate race is a little bit tighter. Well, it's not over till it's over. All available data right now points to Republicans at least losing the House, and possibly the Senate too. So instead of dwelling on the midterms, let's shift our focus to 2028. This will be the first truly open contest in about 12 years since Obama left office. This will be the first election that there really isn't an incumbent on the ballot. Now, 2028 isn't just going to be another election. It's going to be a referendum on Donald Trump and his policy in his second term. It's going to be determined by whether voters in the Republican Party want to continue going forward with Trumpian politics, Trump's policies, and his vision for America, or if they're ready for something new, or even to go back to something they've had before. So with that in mind, I want to review how Trump has done so far, how Trump has done in Trump 2.0. I want to start with what he's done well. So overall, Trump's favorability and approval among Republicans remains very strong. Consistently, it's in about the 80 and 90% range, despite what online chatter might be. The base is still extremely loyal to Trump. We see this happening right now with primary elections that are happening in America, where the candidate that Trump ends up endorsing typically wins their primary. I think he is, he hasn't had a single miss so far in the 2026 primary. So like it or not, Republicans are behind this guy. So on border control, there have been historic successes. Millions of people have been removed through deportations and self-deportations, and the border is now far more secure than it was under Joe Biden. There's been a huge drop in encounters. There's been a huge drop in the amount of people actually coming into America. Like overall, if you're someone who is pro-border security and pro-shutting down the border, you gotta be loving this time right now. The economy and unemployment, it's been relatively stable. So unemployment has returned to its pre-COVID levels. It hasn't really gotten much better than that, but it also hasn't gotten a whole lot worse. But the Dow, the S&P 500, and NASDAQ, they've all hit record peaks in recent months. Foreign policy, though, it's a bit more mixed. The situation in Iran is still developing, so the jury's still out on that one, on whether it will have been a success for the Trump administration or not. But overall, I'd say it's been a little better than under Joe Biden, but it hasn't been a massive success either, I would say. The Republican Party has grown increasingly more anti-war, at least the base, the actual voting base of the Republican Party has grown more anti-war in recent years. So I don't expect foreign policy to be a huge focus in 2028. It wasn't a major issue in 2024 either. I mean, there were several different events that happened under the Joe Biden presidency that resulted in where Republicans would consider bad foreign policy. It was almost never talked about throughout the campaign, right? It was a campaign that was focused so much more strongly on other issues that were happening in America at that time. So housing, though, it's also been a bit of a mixed bag. So the average price of a home, it's stayed roughly the same since Trump took office, but prices have not come down since COVID and are still significantly higher than they were a few years ago. So they're sitting at around $370,000 for the average price of a home in America right now. Trump has made it clear that he wants to keep housing prices up to help existing homeowners, so take that for what it's worth. If you're part of the Republican voting base who tends to be on the older side, who might already have owned a home that they've had for 20, 30 years at this point, you're probably pretty happy with the Trump housing policy. If you're someone like me, though, who doesn't own a home right now, who's looking to go and buy a home in the next few years, you're probably not super happy with the overall housing policy of America. So I think this will really determine also who is getting on board with Trump, because we had a lot of younger voters in the 2024 campaign who were looped in, thinking that Trump was going to be super good for young people. And he's been just kind of okay on those things. On the big ticket issues that matter most to voters, border security, jobs, strength abroad, Trump has delivered to the base. This is what the base wanted, right? This is what he's been saying he was going to do for a long time. I would say the Republican base is overall happy, and clearly they are. He has 80-90% support among them. That said, the administration has mostly focused on immigration, Iran, a handful of smaller issues like Trump accounts, like going after woke colleges, some things with like health and human services, for example. These kind of smaller things that don't really affect the average American's lives all that much. So they haven't taken on really every major challenge that they've had to, and frankly, they haven't been able to with the way that Congress has been functioning. And if Congress is brought to a halt by losing the midterms in November, none of those policy issues that are really major or maybe a little controversial are going to be passed. Of course, you got to take the good with the bad. There have been some serious missteps over Trump 2.0, and starting with the border. Even though, I was just talking a minute ago about how great the border is, there have been some missteps with the border. Early on in the term, the deportations were poorly managed. The rollout created chaos, community disruption, and some tragic deaths and violence caused from it. That damage has been done and will definitely influence how the midterms will go. Voters have not forgotten the ugly pictures they saw on their TV screens from all the protests, from the Trump border rollout, and the media certainly isn't going to let voters forget about it either. The handling the Epstein files, oh my God, we cannot talk about Trump 2.0 without talking about the Epstein files, it seems. But many of us thought this would be a great publicity campaign for the administration, but it completely backfired, right? They released these files very controversially to influencers before they released them to the public. It was a big nothing burger contained inside of it. Trump campaigned on releasing things like the Epstein files, like the JFK files, like the RFK files, like the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination records, all of these big time topics that have a lot of conspiracies around them. Trump campaigned on these things, and I think it left a lot of voters really disheartened when the Epstein files came out, and it was just this big nothing burger of a release. And we were told that we were getting more files that were coming out, and we really didn't get those files. And then it just became ammo for the Democrats to use basically against the Trump administration, even though they had years to release these themselves. They knew that this was going to backfire on Trump. And they were waiting to basically use it to go after the administration and attack him on. And you know what? It's worked. We've seen the media, I feel like you can't get anywhere these days without talking about the Epstein files. They're talking about it all over the place on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, all of these, networks. They're constantly there's constant chatter about the Epstein files. So another thing, the optics and tone of the administration, my God. So Trump is hosting a UFC match. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but Trump is hosting a UFC match on the White House grounds pretty soon. So the UFC, for their credit, they are paying for the event, but it's not a good look for America. This is on the White House grounds. This is a national monument that we're turning into a fighting venue. It doesn't exactly project the dignity most Americans expect from the presidency. And to be fair, it wasn't a great look when Biden hosted shirtless trans queer events there either. But you understand my point, right? We criticized Biden over it. I think that was one of the things that really gave Trump some ammo to use against Biden, was that he held events like that and just the way the White House was run overall. So perfect example of the White House really isn't being run the way that this governmental body should, right? So another thing is the official White House social media channels have become extremely informal and unpresidential. There's been a noticeable lack of formality across the board. I don't know what interns they hired to run these social media accounts, but it's gotten out of hand, folks. It's gotten out of hand. This is not the way that I want my government to be interfacing with citizens. And then, of course, there's Kristi Noem. We cannot talk about the controversies of the Trump administration without talking about Kristi Noem. She spent an enormous amount of taxpayer money, roughly about $220 million, on a large ad campaign for the Department of Homeland Security that heavily featured herself. She was later fired, but the damage was done. The damage was done, guys. It was done, right? It looked like an attempt to jumpstart her 2028 presidential campaign using taxpayer money, and it totally backfired on her. She was fired. It looked bad for the Trump administration. She's probably never going to hold a prominent political job ever again, although I felt the same way after she shot her dog, but then she ended up in the administration. Not to mention the controversies surrounding her husband and his boobs.
Well, no! I will not pray for your husband and his big tits!
That's all I gotta say about that, folks. That's all I gotta say. If Republicans lose even one chamber of Congress in 2026, Trump's agenda will likely grind to a halt over the final 2 years. So it's unlikely that there'd be a conviction on any impeachment articles by the Senate. You need a bigger majority than just half to do that. But if Democrats take control of the Senate, the next 2 years are going to be dominated by endless impeachment talk, investigations, and the administration is going to be dragged into all of these hearings and questions about what they've done so far. And we're not going to get any new policy, really. It's just that we're going to be stagnant for a couple of years, right? And that gridlock is going to heavily shape the national mood heading into 2028. So, because of the mix of real achievements and these controversies, the 2020 Republican primary is going to be a clear referendum on Trump himself. And I kind of see two camps forming on this issue. Number one, the pro-Trump camp. Now, this is going to be the group of people that really unites around Trump, really surrounds him. It's going to be the same group of people who were kind of around him heading into 2024. However, it's going to be around whoever Trump ends up nominating to basically crown the new king of MAGA, if you want to put it that way. So I see this being someone who is from within the administration, someone who's worked very closely with Trump. I see this being Marco Rubio. Now, Marco Rubio currently looks like the leading pick to carry the MAGA banner. So potential allies for Rubio include Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War. I also see, honestly, Tulsi Gabbard being a VP pick for Rubio, assuming that her husband recovers fine. Doug Burgum, too. I think you could throw him into the ring as someone who Rubio would carry into the campaign with him. These are people who, they've been really ingrained in the Trump administration. They've been working very closely with Trump. They have the good grace of him, right? There's not really any talk of Doug Burgum or Pete Hegseth leading the administration. There wasn't even talk of Tulsi Gabbard leaving the administration either, other than her husband suddenly getting diagnosed with a very sad condition. But like I said, other administration headliners could be a part of this, but I see someone who is known, has some name recognition, but it has been in the administration for a while and, has the good grace of Trump and by proxy Marco Rubio. Now, there has been rumors that J.D. Vance will not run in 2028. And I think depending on if he runs or not, that'll really throw into play who Trump ends up nominating to kind of replace him. So I personally don't see J.D. Vance as a winnable candidate for the Republicans. He was great when Trump needed him, right? When Trump was running in 2024, he needed someone who could come and carry the bucket for Trump, who could go on the podcast, who could go on the news shows. J.D. Vance is an excellent verbal communicator. He's an excellent speaker. I don't see him being presidential material, though, going into 2028. So ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to who Trump endorses. I'm assuming he's around in 2028 for that matter, right? But Trump will likely crown his successor for Trumpian politics, and I see that successor being someone who's currently within the administration right now. So I also see this outsider camp forming as well. I see this being someone like Ron DeSantis, who's positioning himself as kind of a standard bearer for those who want change in tone and style. So I could see DeSantis pulling in someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, assuming he wins his election in Ohio, which is pretty close right now. I don't really see him being that big of a national figure if he doesn't. Or Josh Hawley, honestly. Josh Hawley, Missouri Senator. Josh Hawley has kind of been in these conversations of being pulled into the White House. There was talk of him being nominated for Attorney General. But overall, Josh Hawley has some good name recognition. He's very loved by the MAGA base. But he hasn't been directly involved in the administration. So he also is not going to be facing re-election pressure in 2020 either. He's not up for re-election until 2030. And DeSantis is going to be leaving office in early 2027, which positions him really well to start that campaign, and kind of July of 2027, honestly. So he's got that year and a half to campaign and build up that national recognition. And he might even be wanting to be the first person to announce as well. Now, it's important to note, none of these figures, DeSantis, Josh Hawley, Ramaswamy, all of these people, they're not anti-Trump by any means. However, they've largely remained out of the daily White House drama and have flown heavily under the radar. I mean, DeSantis almost, beautifully has flown under the radar in that he's stayed out of talking about national politics. He's focused on running the state for the remaining few months that he's in there. And honestly, can anyone really say they've really heard that much about Ron DeSantis in the past year or so, ever since Trump came back into office? I mean, all the media attention been on Trump. DeSantis really has flown under the radar, and I think that is on purpose, because I don't think DeSantis wants to be associated with the current Trump administration. I think he sees a lot of the writing on the wall I'm talking about in this video, where things could be very shaky going into 2020, depending on what happens in the midterms, especially if Democrats control both chambers of Congress. And DeSantis does not want to go down on the ship if those midterms are, in fact, lost. He wants to separate himself from that and kind of do his own thing, right? So to put this in perspective, every election that we've had in recent years, it really has been a referendum on either a person or a really specific set of issues. So in 2016, it was a referendum on Hillary Clinton. That was the way that the campaigns ended up devolving. I hear people talk, and I hear, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were the two most hated people in America at the time. Hillary Clinton was just hated a little bit more going into that election, and Trump, scraped out a victory there. Going into 2020, though, it was a referendum on Donald Trump. It truly was. It was a referendum on the policies that he had passed, especially on the COVID policies. That was a huge part of the 2020 election. And he lost that election. He couldn't hold up to it. And then going into 2024 is a referendum on woke policy as a whole, right? Like I said earlier, you didn't hear a whole lot of talk about Joe Biden's foreign policy. It was really focused on Joe Biden and then later on Kamala Harris, our corrupt presidents. They're corrupt people. They've run the administration poorly, and they've enacted all these woke policies, right? They hate the normal Americans, right? They're calling us garbage, so Trump goes out and he goes into a garbage truck, right? They hate normal Americans, so Trump shows up at McDonald's and works at McDonald's for a day, right? Stuff like that. And somehow Trump scraped out a victory despite all odds, right? He went up in the polls when a mugshot of him came out. He went up in the polls when he was convicted of crimes. He went up in the polls when he was shot at multiple times. Somehow he pulled that victory out. So 2020 feels more promising for an outsider candidate because of that. Someone who can unify the party beyond the core base. Especially if Congress is gridlocked and Trump gets wrapped up in more controversy and scandals. If the next 2 years are really focused around impeachments, bad Trump policy by congressional Democrats, and nothing really major gets changed, I think it will be a referendum on Trump and whether the American people want 4 more years of Trump-era policy or if they want to invite someone kind of new in who has kind of done their own thing in a state like Florida. 2028 will determine whether the Republican Party stays firmly in the Trump lane long-term or pivots back towards more traditional conservative governance. The good, the bad, and the chaotic moments of the second term will shape everything. And I think these next 2 years are really going to hone in on who really is going to be the front runner for the 2028 Republican nomination. Personally, I believe the outsider lane may have an edge if everything continues on its current trajectory. In 2024, I supported Ron DeSantis in the primaries, and Ron DeSantis himself admits that so many other people would have gladly voted for him had Trump not been running. Because many people felt that was Trump's turn, that Trump wasn't done being president, Trump wasn't going to be a one-term president. And that's why DeSantis didn't get more of a national attention. There were other issues with DeSantis' campaign that I think he's learned from and won't be an issue if he campaigns again. But I see that outsider lane being more open now that Trump will not be on the ballot. That sentiment that Trump deserves the presidency will not be among Republicans. And it'll be interesting to see that once there's a new person who Trump has ordained, if Republicans will favor him by 80 to 90% as well, or if they will move over to, more of an outsider candidate, or how that split will look. But I see it being pretty competitive, depending on how much of a dumpster fire, frankly, the next 2 years are for the Trump administration in terms of the policy they're able to pass and the way that congressional Democrats handle the administration. So tell me, what do you think? Do you think that Marco Rubio will carry the banner, carry the bucket for the Republican Party, be the Trump endorsed candidate going into 2028? Or do you think it will be someone else, like Ron DeSantis? Or do you think that J.D. Vance will stick around and try to be the Trump endorsed candidate going into the 2020 election? Drop your predictions in the comments down below. I'm genuinely curious to see what people think about this. I really don't think that J.D. Vance is going to stick around. I don't think that he's going to want the nominee. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the like button, share this with your friends, and we'll be back here next week with another great video. But until then, peace out. Bye.